Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Grace of a Military Child in Life podcast. Military families are not like your traditional family. They are strong, brave, resilient, and some of the most incredible people I know. My name is Gracie, a U.S. Army brat, and I am your host. I am honored to be able to give military family members like myself a place for them to share their stories and experiences in the military life. Stay tuned for this week's guest. Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Grace of a Military Child in Life. Today, I'm here with Donna, who is a Army brat. So, Donna, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you very much, Gracie. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. So, can you guys just start by telling us what it's like growing up as an Army brat?
My experience was wonderful, and I, as I read comments on Facebook and on people on your podcast, I think I share very similar feelings about growing up as a brat. It was unique. It gave me a sense of community, unlike anything I have experienced in the civilian world. It made me proud. It made me very patriotic.
Yeah.
I loved every minute of it, except when my dad deployed.
Yeah. Yeah, those times are definitely hard, especially because, you never know when to expect a deployment necessarily. It kind of can pop up out of nowhere
Right.
and happen pretty rapidly.
Right.
And you never know how long they're going to be gone for or, any of those details. They're pretty much, just up in the air.
Exactly. The unknown. My mother was always anxious when my dad was on deployment. And then I think I absorbed that as well. So, but other than that, it was a very unique, exciting childhood.
Yeah. And it's definitely, military life is hard, whether you're a spouse, a service member, a child, like it is definitely hard. And you have to be able to adapt to whatever you're given, but it is fun. It's exciting. There's always new adventures to go on, especially when moving and going to new places and traveling and all of that. But yes, it is definitely hard.
It is hard. I don't want to minimize that. It's funny. It's kind of like childbirth. You forget about the painful part and you just think about the beauty. But yeah, if we wanted to talk about the hard, of course, what everybody says is leaving your friends.
Yeah.
I was an adolescent when my dad got out, and I was at that developmental stage where friends became everything. So either me leaving or my friends leaving, that was difficult. I remember a couple of times that I found out the day we were moving that we were moving. It wasn't like we had 3 days in advance notice. So that then you become this incredibly fast packer. And I remember I would have to decide what I had to get rid of, what I could not pack. So separating from some of those items became hard. But then once we got in the car and got going, then we were full of expectations and exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. And I cannot imagine having like a day or so notice of moving and having to, because you really have to pack up your entire life,
Absolutely.
Say goodbye to those friends, realize that you may never be coming back to some of those areas, being able to see, some of the sites that you grew up loving or spent time at, or, even down to the little things like restaurants or stores that you liked to shop at, and you really just have to kind of cut that off and just really move on.
Exactly.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
When I was in fourth grade, I moved to San Antonio, and the teacher, he had this big, long rope. And every time a new student would come, he would tie a knot in it. And so there was a knot representation of every single student. And then either at the end of the year or when you moved, he would, tape it and then cut the knot. So then every student who came through that class, didn't matter the year, but no matter who came through that class, everyone got a little knot at the end. of their time in that classroom, whether it was when they were moving or at the end of the year. And I just think that is so special. And it is very, symbolic of military life because, you're there for a moment. You connect with all of these people on that big, long chain of knots. And then
I
at the
love
end of it,
that.
you cut it off and, you keep the memories because I still have that knot like a decade later.
Oh, that's
And you
great.
have it and you keep it and you hold on to it. But then you have to, kind of cut the past there and move on and still
I
carry
love
those
that.
memories with you.
And I love the symbolism of a knot is connection.
Yeah.
So that kudos to that teacher for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was definitely one of the best. And it was like one of my first military based teachers. And so having that, it really it helps the students move because I moved in the middle of the school year too. And so when I moved into that classroom, it's like, okay, we're tying this knot. It was like a whole little ceremony he did, which is so cool. And
I
he's like,
love
I'm
that.
tying this knot. We're welcoming this new student in. So here is the knot that symbolizes her.
Very
And it's
symbolic.
welcoming you into the classroom and you feel just a part of it like everyone else.
I love
And, you carry that with you. And yeah, I think there's so much symbolism with that in military life as a whole.
exactly. Exactly. And that was your first experience on a base. In my experience, I was in fifth grade when I went to my first civilian school.
Yeah.
And I got to see the differences. So definitely teachers that are on bases, they are so much more effective in helping integrate new and
Yeah.
helping students say goodbye to those leaving. So the kind of a difference between the uh, military teachers and the civilian teachers, both good. There's
Yeah.
just different approaches. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's huge because, you mentioned the transitioning, helping students transition in and out of the classroom. And you're just more equipped to deal with all of that because
Exactly.
you're dealing with it on a day to day basis. And even when I was in fifth grade, I remember one of my friends moving. And like I said, I didn't necessarily grow up near an installation. And so I didn't necessarily experience friends coming in and out for quite a while. And so when it was my first experience of, okay, a friend is moving in the middle of the school year, I was like in tears the entire day because
Yeah.
it was hard and I didn't like saying goodbye. And that was not my strong suit in military life. And so all of the students around me had pretty much grown up with it. And they're like, well, why are you in tears? And they would be asking the teacher, and she's like, she's just having a hard time. Like her best friend is moving.
Yeah.
And, that teacher knew how to address the situation because she had dealt with it, throughout
Many times. Yeah.
basically the entirety of her teaching career. And, if I was in a civilian school, even when I was in a civilian school and I would be crying because my dad is gone, it would
Mhm.
be like, oh, well, the other kids would look at me and be like, your dad works a 9 to 5. He'll be home tonight. And I was like, no, that's not how
No,
this works.
that's not my
I wish
life.
it was.
Yeah. That's not my normal. Gracie,
Yeah.
something similar. I had a third grade teacher one time, and not my best friend, but a good friend of mine was leaving. And we were saying our weepy goodbyes, and she shared something that I kept up for the rest of my time. She
Mm-hmm.
said, Donna, what do you have on you that you can give to Cindy? And Cindy, what do you have that you can give Donna that we get to remember each other by? So
I love
Cindy gave
that.
me this black velvet beret, and I had this little tiny coin purse. And I kept that beret through my master's program. It was in
Wow.
my little box. But then I took that tradition, and every time I left a good friend, if I was if I felt that connection, and I have a little box of trinkets
Yeah.
of items I have shared with my military friends. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that because everything, and actually, one of my friends moved in fourth grade. That was like my first friend I made there. and she moved in fourth grade, and I still have the little thing. I don't know if I gave her something, but she gave me a little uh kind of like memory card deck of just NASA cards. And so
Oh, I
it
love
was all
that.
just kind of like NASA looking trading cards.
You're
And
right.
she gave that to me, and I believe I still have that. And it's just every time I see that, I think of her, and I
Absolutely.
lost connection with her. I don't know where she is or anything, but every time I see that, I remember her, and I remember our friendship and the times that we spent together. So little things like that, little things like that carry such a long way
It
because
does.
you hold on to it, and you forget those memories sometimes, and you need that trigger to remember those times.
You do. You do. And I think what it does is it gave me a visual representation of my community. So, for
Yeah.
example, yesterday I live in Oklahoma, and I went with three friends, two of whom were born and raised in this area. So we spent the day going to old neighborhoods, schools, and parks. And I watch them, and that's so foreign to me. Even as old as I
Yeah.
am, I still, when people say, "Where are you from?" I say nowhere and everywhere, even though I've lived here
Yeah.
the longest. So when I see my letters or my diary entries or my visual representation of the trinkets,
Yeah.
that's my neighborhood. That's where, that's where I go down memory lane to visit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's this saying that goes around, and it's like home is where, people will fill in their specific branch, or just home is where the military sends us. And
Right.
that just rings so true because, most of us military kids, we don't necessarily have one place that we can call home.
Right.
We can travel around to everywhere we lived. And, you know, for me, at least, there's a certain, I spent my childhood up until 9 years old in Cleveland. And so that feels most like home to me when I go back.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I can
so
see
there's
that.
a place that may feel like most like home, but you don't necessarily like my family's not there. I have a lot of friends there, but my family is not there. We don't have a house there. I don't have
See?
a car there. I've never driven there
Yeah.
before. Like, so
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that don't have it being a physical home, but it kind of, you just have that sense of, okay, I belong here. But
Right.
then,
Right.
your physical home, your house that you live in is somewhere completely different. And I've heard people saying, they felt most like home living overseas. And, they can't necessarily just, hop in the car and drive to London or,
For
somewhere over
Germany.
there. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a lot of planning that goes into that. And not everyone has the desire to just move and plant their life in, a Germany or Europe or something like that.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I have three siblings, so four of us total, and every one of us approached or looked back differently of our childhood. My
Yeah.
brother, oldest one, and I don't know if you know this, but 30% of Army brats, not Army, military brats, will either enter the military or will marry into the military. And
Yeah.
it's because it's their normal, it's what they know. So my older brothers and my younger sister all have that 3 year itch,
Mm-hmm.
and I did not. And I think it's a developmental thing. But my sister, after moving many times and many relationships and many jobs, finally contacted me about 6 months ago. And she's in this beautiful new community in North Carolina. And she said, I'm home. For the
Yeah.
first time, I feel like I'm home. And it's not near a base, but it's whatever she was looking for in those journeys and moving every few years. So when I talk to older people like me that were military brats, we talk about shared experiences, about how you navigated that 3 year itch. How did you navigate learning to make friends well, but not learn how to keep them
Yeah.
and nurture them? So shared experiences are so important.
Yeah, they are. And I like that you mentioned too that it's so different even between siblings. My sister and I are 15 months apart. I'm a little older than her. And even just, it's not necessarily something we talk about on the daily, but when I recorded a podcast with episode with her a couple of years ago, it's funny listening to us tell the same story, but from our different perspectives. And
Yes.
even about a year and a half, separation between our ages makes a huge difference because some things that I remember pretty vividly well, she doesn't remember as well, or she didn't
Mhm.
have those same experiences in the classroom. Like the knot story I was telling you, she didn't have that experience with a teacher. So there are definitely, some shared experiences, but at the same point, every military, brat who goes through this, every spouse, every service member, you have so many shared experiences, but it's so different and so unique to each individual person.
Mhm. It
It's
is.
it's really fun and fascinating to hear about, and especially like you said, developmental. Like everyone has different ways that they kind of cope with military life. Some people are okay with moving and traveling and seeing the world, and they kind of look at it more, glass half full rather than glass half empty. And that's just everyone has their own personality. Everyone deals with this in a different way. And it's really nice to see.
I like your word of perspective. Absolutely, because I belong to a couple of Facebook groups about military brats online and some others, as do you. I saw you. And
Yeah,
it's interesting that it's almost like a lens thing.
right.
We see things through a lens. But my takeaway from most of these groups and your podcast is that we tend to be very resilient and we tend to be pretty strong individuals.
Yeah.
So that I think that's what that gave us, that
Yeah.
ability to bounce and land, many times. But yeah, perspectives and looking at the same experience with lens. My sister and I, it's so interesting about how our memories are different,
Yeah.
visual and auditory and um, vacation, a school. But what's cool though is when we share the experiences, then we kind of complete the picture. I'll say, man, I don't remember that, but I'm so glad you do.
Right.
Or she'll keep a picture that I didn't keep. So yeah, we do what we have to do to keep up that wholeness of
Yeah.
that lifestyle.
Yeah. And going through it, some things may mean more to you, some, certain pictures or
Yeah.
memories, and then some may be more important and more impactful to her. And so when you kind of bring them together to compare, like you said, you get the full picture then. And then
Yes. Yeah.
you start to remember things. And that's why I love talking to so many military brats and families as a whole, because you just start talking and then these it triggers so many memories and so many things that you might not have thought of,
Might not have
going through
remembered.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, with your age and your generation, are you able to keep up with some of your friends through social media and email?
Yeah. So it's definitely easier. There's a lot of friends that I've lost contact with, but it's
Mhm.
definitely easier. So I was born in '02, and I've kind of grew up in that 2010s. That's like my big military journey was like early 2010s. And my dad retired in 2014. And so, social media was not that big during
Right.
those times.
Right.
Instagram was just becoming a thing, and my parents were like, no, like, they were you can get social media if you choose to at 18. So when I did get social media, um, it was fun going back because I started remembering the names of people or
No.
going through the yearbooks. And it had been probably about 8 to 10 years that I hadn't, talked to a lot of these kids. I'll say like 6 to 10 years. And so it had been a while, but then
Hmm.
you start going back and you find people and start to discover, those relationships again. And when you connect with them, or at least in my case, I reconnected with so many friends, and it's like no time has passed.
That's
We were able to
wonderful.
be friends and pick up right where we left off. And there's a lot of people that I just have better relationships with now than when I did. And a lot of it, like we were talking about earlier, those shared experiences, because, maybe my dad was wounded. And so maybe both of our parents were wounded and we never realized that, or uh, that, we're both in the military, going into it now. And so, we have so many shared experiences, especially going through life, even in that time gap, that it's definitely fun to connect and reconnect with those people again.
Oh, you're so lucky. You're so lucky. And you're so lucky that it's like no time had passed,
Yeah.
that and look at you developmentally. When you're 14 and you leave, you're on such a different emotional level. And then you come back as an adult and look back. I think that's great. I think that's
Yeah.
great. You can do that.
Yeah. I love kind of going through this. And there's a website now called website, social media platform, everything, called Bloom Military Teens.
Okay.
And it's so cool just to see it's for military teens, ran by military teens, and that's
Oh,
what they are. And they just literally, they're all over the world,
the world.
stationed everywhere. And it was started by two military teens who were stationed together at one point, and then when they started this, they were on opposite ends of the world,
Oh,
and
wow.
they just came together and were like, we need representation in the military community. But you don't necessarily know the life of a military child unless you go through it.
Right.
And, I always say I'm so appreciative of all of these organizations and these people that come together uh, to kind of support the military community. But unless you really go through it, you can't understand exactly what we go through. And these military teens are just coming up and uh, connecting with so many people who are on that same path that they are on
I
and
love
dealing with the
that.
same things.
I'm impressed with their abilities to even pull that together, to see the need and then implement something like that.
Yeah.
Wow. Says a lot about them and
Yeah.
what their futures are going to look like as adults.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really been amazing to see just the military community pull together in so many different aspects, and all of these spouses even who kind of see that need. And I think that it's just so echoed within the military community that you see a need, you've been through a situation, you don't necessarily know how you're getting through it, but you figure it out because you don't have another option. And you collect the resources and then you just share them with everyone else. And, some people create a platform to do that. Some create an organization or other, means of doing that. And they just all come together to really make this community what it is.
That's wonderful. And I attribute a lot of that to the VA and veteran resource centers around the world that
Yeah.
we stumped our toe through the Vietnam era.
Yeah.
And then we learned some things through that era. And then when we went to the Gulf War and Desert Storm, we, like you said, started collecting more resources. How can we be more helpful? How can we be more proactive in helping these families that are coming back and returning?
Yeah.
So we're learning as we go, but I think we're so much further we are now than 50 years ago with our veterans coming out of the Vietnam War.
Yeah. It's definitely awesome. And I've seen so much improvement even since my dad was injured in 2011. And so seeing just the strides that we're making, and even, you know, like I think I mentioned earlier, my family was a reserve family. And so, for example, when a service member is injured on a deployment, they don't necessarily get PCS automatically to their recovery center. And so we
Oh,
lived in a Fisher house and in a hotel room for over 10 months, almost a
wow.
year, while my dad was in recovery, and my parents literally were fighting, going to Senate committee hearings and all of that to get an exception of policy to PCS our family, because my mom was like, no, my husband deserves the same state of the art treatment that all of these other guys are getting. Like, we can't necessarily just be sent home to recover in, a normal hospital setting. Uh, and I'm not leaving him to recover by
Good
himself.
for your
And
mom. Good for your
so, there
mom.
was an exception of policy made, and we had went through the steps to get to that. And when the next reserve family came as we were leaving, or right after we left, we had already been through that process. We knew the steps that needed to be taken. So we could tell that reserve family, these are the exact steps you need to take to get your PCS. And hopefully, that just trickles down the line of, all
Yes.
right, here's
Yeah.
the next reserve family, here's the next reserve family, because it is so different for every family, just military life as a whole. And so you collect the resources that work for you in those specific situations. And then, maybe they work for someone else. Maybe they don't. Maybe there's other resources that work better, but you can at least be there to pass it on and say, hey, here's what worked for us. Hopefully it can work for you.
Good for you guys and good for your mom for fighting for that.
Yeah. I think that just, goes to speak to the resilience of military spouses too, because, they have so much on them of, raising children or working or going to school or, just trying to live life, that it is challenging for them as
Very
well.
challenging. Very challenging. How's your dad doing now?
Good. We have gone through much recovery, and we always say recovery is always it's always on the daily. Like, there are still constant appointments and everything for
Mhm.
his injuries, but there, like I said, there's so much improvement, and
Oh,
especially
good.
within the medical community, that it's been really cool to see all of these treatments emerge. And he's always been the one to step up as a guinea pig too, to try out new
Good.
things and
Good.
uh, new technologies that are just, there hasn't been
Amazing,
research on
aren't
it.
they? I
Yes.
know. I know. I'm so glad. And some pretty non-traditional
Yeah.
alternative therapies. So again, we've come so far. We're doing so well. But kudos to your parents for fighting that fight and getting
Yeah.
the care.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the last thing I want to ask you is, what is a piece of advice that you would give to another military brat? Because, like you said earlier, it is still a very similar life, with the time difference. But what would you say to another military brat going through this lifestyle?
Well, I'll share. Thank you for asking that because I want to share something with you. I recently spoke at a state conference about transitioning from military to civilian and the impact it has on not just the veteran, but the spouse and the children.
Yeah, it's
And when
huge.
it was fun and it was, but so eye opening because I learned so much. I'm coming
Yeah.
through this with my own blinders, my experience. But one of the things that I found is as a brat, whether you are or a spouse, you need to advocate for yourself in the medical and mental health realm.
Yeah.
Every time you go through an intake, you should say, I want you to know that my background is I was a military spouse or brat. And I also believe that every practitioner should ask that on an intake question. I found out later that all four of us, my two brothers, my sister, all went into therapy at some point. All doing great, but just how you check in every once in a while when you come across an issue.
Yeah.
And it was far into it before that therapist ever found out that any of us were military brats. And they said, well, had we known, we could have focused on how do you think that's impacting you as an adult? I think that we don't realize how our experiences impact us as an adult.
Right.
My sister, she would change boyfriends every 3 years until she realized she could take the boyfriend with her every 3 years. So
Yeah.
but you don't know what that is. You just know that there's this feeling. So my advice would be to always let people that are important to you or important to your health or your emotional health, let them know that you are coming from that world and explore how those experiences could be affecting you as an adult.
Yeah, because I think, you go through this lifestyle as a child or as a spouse or, even as a service member, and you leave the life because everyone has to leave at some point. A
Yeah.
child, your parent
Yeah.
retires, a
Yeah.
spouse, your husband or wife retires. And at 12 years old, when my dad took his medical retirement, I didn't understand. Like I said, I was reserved, so I grew up in a civilian area, and then I
Mm-hmm.
moved to base, and then we moved out of the base area into a civilian area again. And as soon as you feel like you find your community, you have to leave it.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
that's, that's military life as a whole when you move anywhere, but then especially when you get to that retired life, and you have to leave that community, or you move out and go to college, or you start your own journey as a child. And it's definitely hard to kind of leave that behind. And you don't necessarily realize the impact it has on you until it's gone.
Exactly. Exactly. And then you look around, and I think the older you are as your father's or mother separates, I think the
Mm-hmm.
harder that transition is because your normal is no longer normal. So you try to find that. And that's why I shared that many will go back into the military because it's what
Yeah.
you knew to be. So yeah, and then just understand that when your parents transition, they might be experiencing some depression and anxiety about what that looks like and the loss of identity from
Yeah.
their rank or their status to a civilian world that can't understand how to translate those skills. So
Yeah.
yeah, just be very aware and very open with your experiences and cherish them and appreciate them and um, journal them when you can, I would say.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you
Well,
so much for being on the podcast.
thank you for allowing me to do this. And I think you're doing great work. And I just wish you very well in your next adventure.
Thank you so much.
Okay, take care. I'll keep up with you through your podcast.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye, Gracie.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Grace of a Military Child and Life podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to give it a like, follow, and comment. Also, be sure to check out Instagram and Facebook at Grace of a Military Child and Life for more awesome content. For information on the podcast, Military Child Bigs and Littles, Go AMCL blog, or other resources, visit www.goamcl.org. You can also email me at Gracie, that's GRACIE @GOAMCL.org with any questions or comments. To be a guest on the podcast, you can schedule it at www.goamcl.org/schedule a podcast, all one word, or contact me via social media or email. Stay tuned for the next episode where another incredible story is shared.